muted is not referring to us. So welcome to the April meeting of the Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission. It's an open public meeting. It is being recorded. And let's go around with the introductions and see if there's any public comment. But after the public comment round, it will be open only to commissioners to speak. So Steve, let's start with you and go around this.
Good evening, Steve Burr, county staff on the air team.
Alex Rowe, Commissioner.
Melissa Bed, Commissioner.
Helen Haas, student member.
Joe Trevette, Commissioner.
Drew Stilson, county staff on the air team.
Jenna Peabody, air team.
Cindy Lewin, Commissioner.
Elizabeth Whitney, Commissioner and Chair of the Energy Committee.
Trevor Montano, Commissioner.
Jason Papakasma, Sustainability Environmental Management Division Chief.
Doug Snowden-Boss, I'm Commissioner.
Bob Zandoli, Commissioner.
Let's go to the so Rich and Lisa. Hi, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Marcellus, Commissioner and FNRC liaison.
Great. And Rich and
Yeah, hi. Good evening. Rich Dooley, Director of Climate Policy for the county. Thanks.
and Vanessa.
Hello, Vanessa Go, Sustainability Consultant with AECOM.
Great. Well, thank you guys for being remote because it's very intimate in this room. So, is there any public comment? Nothing that was submitted in writing, nothing. So no public comment. So let's go ahead. Oh, I want to mention that Joan, she sent a note around saying she was at an SPRC meeting tonight, but she's out. And I think Jonathan is on paternity leave. We don't have a formal paternity leave program, but we recognize. Anyway, so with that, Drew, I think we turn it over to you. And Jason, did you want to make an introduction and maybe of yourself, even since would you like to introduce?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I'm just sitting in the corner here trying to finish up. Yeah, no, we just happy to be here to present the update tonight. Just backing up, I think the last time I was here, at least talking to you guys, I was in an acting role for this.
Yes. I just heard that fly by.
Yeah, so I have the privilege. I've been selected to continue in this role.
Congratulations.
Yeah, really important.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Really enjoying the partnership so far. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot to intro. Drew.
Partnership with us?
Yeah, with C2E2.
There must be others.
Yeah, no, this particular partnership for sure. Yeah, we're happy to be here tonight to go through the GHG inventory update.
All right, Drew.
I'm
Maybe that's a little about your background too. Oh, and here comes John.
gonna stand to make it slightly less awkward, more awkward. I'm not sure which flavor you can see me up here. But yeah, we're happy to talk to you today about the 2023 update to the greenhouse gas inventory. My name is Drew Stilson. I'm an energy program specialist on the AIR team. And I worked with Vanessa Go at AECOM, the consulting firm that helped us complete this inventory update. So I'll be talking a little bit about the context and framing for the inventory, and then I'll pass it over to Vanessa to talk a little bit about the methodology and the results, and then come back to me to talk a little bit about next steps and some comparisons to our CEP targets. So before we dive into the details here, some of the key takeaways that we'll be talking through in this presentation. We'll go over, like I said, the details of the methodology and the results that went into developing this inventory. 2023 emissions from this analysis are more or less consistent with the trajectory that was projected as part of the 2019 CEP. So we will have some visuals on that to show later. But you might remember that as the wedge chart from the community energy plan. So the 2023 emissions came in roughly in line with where we were hoping to be for this year. We've seen a decrease in emissions of 18% since 2016 and 35% since 2007. So again, we'll have a little bit more detail on where we've seen those reductions a little bit later on. And then looking to the future, the 2023 inventory will form the basis of the any quantitative analysis that will be done as part of the CEP update or the climate action plan update So any forward-looking projections of emissions or emission reduction strategies will use the 2023 inventory as sort of the baseline for that. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about future alignment with MWCOG's inventory, since MWCOG goes through their own process of developing inventories for their member jurisdictions. We're looking at ways to better leverage the work that they're already doing. So the agenda for this presentation, I'll go over some of the background and the inventory boundaries, so what was included and not included. Then Vanessa will be going over some of the methodology updates and results. And then she'll pass back to me so we can compare to what we had projected in the 2019 CEP and then talk a bit about those next steps. So greenhouse gas inventory, what is it? It provides a snapshot of the greenhouse gas emissions generated by activities occurring within the county for a given calendar year. So it doesn't look at any future projections. So this inventory doesn't try to predict anything in future years. It doesn't look at any future emission reduction strategies. It's purely a look at what were the activities that occurred in 2023 and what were the resulting emissions from those activities. And so with the completion of this inventory, we now have inventories for 2007, 2012, 2016, and 2023. And this most recent update was completed by consultants at AECOM with data inputs provided by county staff. This is a little bit about why we do an inventory. It helps us track our progress toward our reduction goals, so to measure our current emissions. It gives us some insight on the largest sources of emissions, where are they coming from and how have they been changing over time. And then we use that information to direct and prioritize climate actions and investments. And then again, as I mentioned, it also forms the basis for the quantitative analysis that will be feeding into the climate action plan. I won't go over this slide in detail, but it's just to give an idea of all the different data inputs that feed into the analysis, to give a sense of all the different sources that we pulled from. So the 2023 inventory was completed using a tool called the ClearPath tool provided by ICLEI, which is basically an emissions calculator. You put in various data inputs and it helps you apply emission factors and actually calculate the emissions associated with the activity data that you input to the tool. And yeah, there's a longer list of data sources that you'll be able to review in the full report, but this is just sort of a sample of all the different data sources that feed into the analysis. So how did we draw the boundaries for this inventory? What's included, what's not included. So we start with all emissions in Arlington County being generated within Arlington County, but we exclude federal and state facilities because we don't have jurisdiction over those. So we don't include them in our reduction targets. That includes things like the airport and the Pentagon. Those are the biggest facilities that we'd be referring to, but anything that's under the jurisdiction of the federal government or the state government, we remove from the inventory. We include scopes 1 and 2 in our inventory, as well as some scope 3. So that means scope 1 is anything that's actually producing a gas within the geographic boundaries of the inventory. So things like process emissions or fuel combustion that's occurring within the geographic boundary. And then scope 2 in our case is primarily referring to the electricity that we purchase from the utilities. So any grid sourced electricity, the emissions are being generated where that electricity is being generated. But the electricity is being consumed within the county, so we include the emissions associated with those. And then scope 3 are emissions that are occurring outside of our boundary, but as a result of activities that are occurring within the boundary. So the main scope 3 emissions that we included in this inventory were associated with waste and wastewater. So the solid waste that we produce in the county is sent, most of it is sent to the waste energy plant in Alexandria. Some of it's also sent to landfills. So the emissions associated with that waste are occurring outside of the county, but as a direct result of the waste generation occurring within the county. So we include those emissions in our emissions totals. And then just a quick note about county operations. The community-wide inventory doesn't break out in detail the sources within the county operational emissions inventory. We have a separate inventory that's now available on the website. I believe you all got a link to that last week, but there's a dashboard that you can click through the county operations sources and look at in more detail in terms of how many, what the quantity of emissions coming from buildings versus the fleet associated with county operations is. But they are included in the totals in the community-wide inventory. So when you see the results here, the county operations emissions are embedded in those totals, and they do make up about 3% of our community-wide emissions. And then I think from here, we'll pass it over to Vanessa for a few minutes to talk about methodology and results.
Great, thank you, Drew. So we did make some updates to both the 2023 inventory and historic inventories, and those updates primarily focus on compliance with the newest GHG protocol guidance. So we are following the Global Protocol for Community Scale GHG Inventories, which is known as the GPC. And then we also ensured that both the recent inventory and historic inventories aligned with the MWCOG inventories and methodologies as much as possible. So we detailed these exact updates in the GHG inventory report, but we can review some of them here. Something else to note is that based on protocol guidance, the county established a significance threshold for updating historic emissions inventories. And essentially what this means is if you're thinking of making a methodological or an emission source change that would impact 5% or more of historic emissions, then that change should be made. Anything less than that can be addressed on a case-by-case basis. So the sources that were added to the 2023 inventory were mostly made for alignment purposes with MWCOG, but in some cases, they were also based on data availability and just producing a more accurate inventory. So some examples you see here are we added refrigerant leakage emissions, agricultural soils, and natural gas fugitive emissions. Those were primarily added to align with MWCOG. We also added composted waste because that data was available and we wanted to create a more accurate inventory. Next slide. All right, so taking a look at refrigerants, refrigerants aren't required to be reported as part of the GPC, so the protocol that we're following, but we did add them just to be in alignment with MWCOG protocols. And MWCOG estimates refrigerant emissions by downscaling national data using a population ratio. So we essentially just took the MWCOG estimates and added them to our inventory, and they are top-down estimates of refrigerant emissions. And these include estimates of hydrofluorocarbons or HFCs, which have a high global warming potential, and they come from cooling or leaks from cooling systems, so from air conditioners or refrigeration units in buildings and vehicles. And we do see that these have risen over time. The use of HFCs and leaks have risen over time as they're replacing other types of refrigerants following the Montreal Protocol, which is trying to shift away from ozone depleting substances or ODSs, but unfortunately move towards more global warming or refrigerants with higher global warming potentials. Fortunately, we do expect HFCs to decrease over time through the US AIM Act. So what that does is it requires a phase down of HFC production and use in the US. So we do expect to see these to decrease over time. Next slide. All right, so as Drew noted, emissions have decreased since the first emissions inventory in 2007, and these are some of the primary drivers for those decreases. The first one would be an 18% decrease in electricity use in the county. We then have a 23% decrease in transportation emissions intensity. So for every vehicle mile traveled, the amount of GHGs that are produced for traveling that mile have been decreasing over time. And then we also see a 44% decrease in electricity emissions intensity. So for every kilowatt hour used in the county, the amount of GHGs released to produce that kilowatt hour have also been decreasing over time. And that's primarily due to a shift in the electric grid, moving from coal and natural gas sources to more clean energy sources. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the high-level results for the emissions inventories over time. In 2023, emissions were around 1.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or C2E2. They have fallen 18% since the last inventory in 2016, and 35% since the very first emissions inventory in 2007. Buildings have remained the largest emission source over time, followed by transportation, and these two sectors generated about 90% of total emissions in 2023. And again, we added the refrigerant emissions this year into historical inventories, and in 2023, those were roughly 7% of total emissions. Next slide. So this chart shows that even though emissions have been decreasing over time, population has actually been increasing in the county, especially compared to our very first inventory year in 2007. So what that means is that Arlington County's GHG emissions per capita has been decreasing, essentially demonstrating that the county is becoming more emissions efficient, so to say. Next slide. So this table just gives a pretty high-level overview of the trends and drivers of emissions changes in each sector. So for buildings, emissions have decreased 47% since 2007, and this is primarily due to a reduction in building energy use and also the emissions intensity of the grid that we touched on earlier. For transportation, emissions have decreased 23% since 2007, and this is due to the average fuel efficiency improving in vehicles over time. For the waste sector, waste emissions actually increased 32% from 2016 to 2023. And this is primarily due to an increase in the reported waste generated, and then also a methodology change in how we are accounting for waste emissions. And then refrigerants have increased 10% since 2016 and 72% since 2007 due to a shift from those ozone depleting substances, the ODSs, towards more HFCs. And this is consistent with national trends and population growth in the county. And again, we do expect to see these decrease over time. Next slide. All right, and we wanted to touch on the transportation sector. So the transportation VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and emissions data is from MWCOG data. So we're using their MOOS outputs from their 2022 update to visualize 2045. This was the most up-to-date available or up-to-date data available at the time. But something to note is that VMT data was not adjusted for the impacts of COVID-19 on travel patterns, and they're likely overestimated. So MWCOG is updating the VMT data. They're going to update it based on observed data, and which will most likely decrease the amount of VMT we see in 2023, and that will be available later this year. And also looking at the MWCOG data, it suggests that the county's historic estimates for transportation emissions are likely overestimated. But if you substitute the MWCOG methodology into the county's old historic inventories, the impact will be less than 5% of total emissions. So it is below that significant threshold, but just important to note as we kind of shift to different data sources or use MWCOG's data. And then also just to analyze the VMT trend or what we expect to see when we do get that updated data from MWCOG, we looked at something called Google Environmental Insights Explorer, and this provides localized VMT data based on continuous observation. And that showed that VMT in the region actually decreased 12% from 2018 to 2023. So we expect to see something similar, not exactly the same, when we receive the new data from MWCOG. And that will all be incorporated into the inventory as we receive updates from them. Next slide. Okay, so then we wanted to look at county operational emissions. So this is county government emissions. This includes Arlington Public Schools. These are in the county-wide inventory, but just not broken out into specific details or subsectors. So county government emissions generated 3% of total community-wide emissions in 2023. And these are calculated as part of the Better Climate Challenge. And the data is available on the County Operations GHG Inventory dashboard. We did want to note that if you account for contractual renewable energy purchases when you're calculating county government emissions, so for example, the Maplewood VPPA emissions would only be 2% of countywide or community-wide emissions, and that would be down from 4% in 2016. And overall, county operational emissions have decreased 37% since 2007 and 24% since 2016, so they've been decreasing over time. Next slide. All right, and this is a summary slide of the sectors and subsectors included in the GHG inventory. We also have our 4 inventory years, and then the change between the most recent inventory, so that would be 2016 and 2023, and then the very first inventory, so 2007 to 2023. There's a lot of detail here. We won't go through all of it right now, but if there are questions at the end and we can come back to the slide, we can do that. This is also in the inventory report. All right, and then I think that's it for my slides, and I'll pass it back to Drew.
Thanks, Vanessa. So just to wrap up the results section, we wanted to show a comparison with the targets that were set as part of the CEP back in 2019. So this chart here is showing the business as usual projection is the blue line on the top, and it's projecting off of the 2016 inventory. And then the orange line is the sort of strategy consistent trajectory that we projected once you layered in the different emission reduction strategies that were included in that 2019 analysis. And so you'll notice the green bar, that's our 2023 estimate. It's a little bit different than the number we showed earlier, and that's because we've adjusted to make it an apples to apples comparison with those projections that were done. So I mentioned we had added things like refrigerant emissions, which were about 7% of total emissions, but those were not included in our 2016 inventory or in our 2019 CEP projection. So to make this comparison, a direct comparison with those projections, we pulled that out, and so we're presenting an adjusted total here. And the other thing you'll notice is the dotted lines where that bar crosses the emission forecasts. And that's because those emissions were projected on 5-year increments. So the CEP had a projection for 2020 and 2025 and not specifically for 2023. So we're kind of interpolating there to see how we're doing on in between those 2 years. We came in below the 2020 forecast and above the 2025 forecast. So we're in that range of where we'd like to be. But we have some distance to go to stay on track with that 2025 forecast. Excellent. And then similarly here, we also had some per capita emissions targets established in that 2019 CEP. And so this is showing the historical per capita emissions and then the per capita emission targets that were set for 2020 and 2030. And then again, that adjusted 2023 emission estimate. So we had a goal of 7.5 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per person in 2020 and 4.3 in 2030. And we came in below that 2020 target. And you can see we are aiming to get down to that 4.3 by 2030. And then just a few notes on next steps to mention that we're looking to align our inventory even further with MWCOG's inventory. We're expecting MWCOG to publish theirs later this year, near the end of the year is what we're expecting. We plan to update our inventory as needed to, once we get a look at their data, and in particular their VMT modeling, as we discussed, will be an area of emphasis to make sure that our inventory is well aligned with their inventory. And we plan to use MWCOG's inventory as the basis for tracking our progress in the future. Our inventories have historically aligned within about 1 or 2% in terms of the totals. And then again, just to mention one more time, this analysis is really foundational in the climate action plan process. So any quantitative analysis that will be done as far as projecting emissions forward and doing quantitative analysis of different mitigation strategies will rely heavily on this inventory as sort of the foundation for that work. And those trends will inform the development of that quantitative analysis. So with that, I think we can go ahead and open it up for any questions, and maybe Jenna, we can put the results table up for people to kind of reflect on.
All right, Doug, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would ask Jenna if she could put up page 11 of the report. I'd be so grateful. Yeah, so Drew and Vanessa, you guys have done an excellent job here, and there's a whole lot of detail, and it's very well presented. I really appreciate all the hard work that you've done here. So thank you very much. But big picture, I think it's important to have the right takeaways. I see, these bars going down. Of course, you started a long time ago, which makes it look like they're going down even more. But I'm worried that the county staff, the county manager, even county board members might get the wrong impression here and might pat themselves on the back when I'm really not so sure that we should be doing that. If you look at page 11, maybe we can blow this up a little. I don't know. It's hard to read. Thank you very much. At the top chart there. So if we look at the numbers from 2016 to 2023, and this breaks out between scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And I know the scope 3 are small and we don't even need to worry about them. Actually, they went up. But anyway, so there is a reduction from 2016 to 2023 in scope 1, but it's like 80,000 metric tons, which is about 7%. But the reduction then in scope 2 is considerable, like 320,000. So 80% of the reduction is really from the grid getting greener. Is it not?
Yeah. That is a really large contributing factor, is the reduction in the emission intensity of the grid. That's correct. I think it's likely the single largest driver of the reductions. think that's correct.
And then to the extent that we talk about vehicles, yes, vehicles generally have been having better mileage and a higher percentage of electric vehicles, which would drive down vehicle stuff. But that's not anything that Arlington County has done other than installing a lot of EV chargers, which is good. So, I mean, I'm not sure that the county can really take a lot of credit for these reductions because this was stuff that was done in Richmond when the Virginia Clean Economy Act required Dominion to reduce the energy intensity of their power sources for the grid, right?
Can I chime in on the vehicle? This was a point I was going to make too. I thought what I heard Vanessa say was that vehicle miles traveled decreased 12%. So in your summary chart, you said that while the overall emissions from vehicles went down 25%, you attributed it to fuel economy. It seems like maybe half was attributable to fuel economy and half to lower vehicle miles traveled.
Which is due to COVID.
COVID or better public transportation or more public transportation or whatever, right? So, but just can we clarify that whether or not that the 25%? So, Vanessa, that was just, you're saying the majority of that came from increased fuel efficiency, but actually it's a combination of that plus a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. Is that right?
So the current VMT we have shows an increase in VMT from 2016 to 2023, right? But that data will be updated, and we are expecting to see then a decrease in VMT, which would further decrease your transportation sector emissions. So any decrease we see over a longer period of time, so if we're looking back to 2007, that decrease we see as mainly an impact of the fuel efficiency of vehicles and not a VMT impact, because those VMTs are almost the same since 2007. But that's why we have to wait for this transportation update to see what the new VMT would actually be in reality.
Okay, thanks. So the Google thing you mentioned at the minus 12%, that's can we go back to that slide? Yeah, misunderstood.
Yeah, so that's what Google EAE said for 2018 to 2023. So we expect when we get the updated VMT from NWCOG that it should follow a relatively similar decrease, not exactly the same because they don't use the exact same modeling principles, but we do expect to see that decrease, which would further decrease the emissions that we're seeing in the transportation sector currently in these slides.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also add to the electricity comment as well, the scope 2 emissions, we have seen a decrease in electricity use as well. So that 18% decrease is also a factor. But a large factor is the decrease in the overall grid emissions factor, which is measuring the emissions factor of your whole subregion. So that's correct.
No.
So bringing up the electricity emission factors, were you using supplier specific from Dominion local, or were you using like eGrid?
We were using eGrid for the location-based emissions factors. For the market-based emissions factors, that's when we were trying to use more localized data from Dominion about the number of RECs purchased in the region.
Liz and then Trevor.
How about in that building sector? Is that where we can maybe look at decisions made by the county to either approve more energy efficient buildings or set better standards or anything? What accounts for that? Or I guess maybe what we're all trying to get at is, did emissions just decrease because of global trends in the market, or are there things that the county was doing that really worked that we can do more of or celebrate, or how do we attribute these results to decisions that were made so that we can identify ways that we can do more of what works?
Yeah, I think the county does have a number of programs that are working on getting at this issue, like the green building incentive policy and the CPACE policy. I think we're going to be definitely looking as part of the climate action plan process at where we need to be doing more and what the scope of the challenge is going to be to achieve the emission targets. I will say doing any really nitty gritty attribution analysis in terms of, where exactly did these emissions come from is difficult with the level of data we're able to get. So for example, the electricity data that we put into the analysis is just the aggregate electricity use for the entire county. We're not able to get that broken down by zip code or specific building or anything like that.
I would add on to that, since 2016, Virginia did update the energy codes for all the buildings, which was also be attributed to that.
And I think that both of these questions were very robust conversations we had internally, sort of like where are the levers, what can we pull, and I think that's all going to be teed up, in the climate action policy, where it's like, hey, we know we can, just less energy will have an impact, and with the grid, we don't have direct control, but is there advocacy work and the work we need to do in the state corporation commission? So I think that we're trying to get to a place where it's like each of these, where it's not in our control. Is there influence? Are there things that we can put our efforts to sort of drive those down?
Thank you.
I'm first of all, I mean, I know you're getting a lot of hard questions from this group, but this is fantastic data
Yes,
and
we should have
information.
led
and,
with
like,
that.
this is-
Yeah.
like we put in the climate action plan, like that we want to be a North Star for others around the country around how we treat climate. And I think this is gold standard. So kudos to the team. Similar to the points that have been made around the buildings, right? I think we've all sat on SPRC review committees, like we all see kind of how the green building incentive plan is applying to some of those buildings. And some, it works better than others. But we don't have, in the Commonwealth, we don't have a great stick that, Montgomery County and DC they have a better stick with respect to building standards, right? Assuming that those are all held up in court, because I think there's some court cases around them. And so I guess as you think about like the trajectory of buildings within the county, right? It doesn't feel as great as maybe some of the overall data would imply, right? Because we're sitting on SPRCs, we're not getting to LEED platinums, we're not there. The developers are getting to where they need to be to try to get the density that they want, but there isn't a culture, incentive, stick or carrot to do anything more. And I think the trajectory would imply that there needs to be more to get to that zero, right? By 2047 or 2050.
That's, I mean, come on.
Right. Well, and so that's it. So I guess, I mean, I'm kind of stating the obvious because we're all familiar with this issue, but like, to the point that was made, is there anything more we can be doing? Obviously, there are other jurisdictions. Most of this relates to money, right? How much more does it cost incrementally to go from gold to platinum? How much more? And the way that other jurisdictions are handling some of that is around CPACE, is around green banks, is around federal grants, is around other things, trying to close that gap and find any sort of subsidy possible to try to make that happen. So I guess I don't really have a question. I'm just making a comment that it would be great to think about kind of that overall trajectory and what else can be done to bridge that gap, because ultimately it's about dollars and cents.
I have a question about transportation. How did you address double counting with EVs? I see they used VMT for those, but when you transferred VMT maybe over to electricity usage, were you subtracting that from a different area within? Because if it's attributed to the same apartment buildings or business buildings, so you're double counting. So did you subtract any of those kilowatt hours?
Yeah, so any EV electricity use that we estimated, we subtracted from other utility electricity use. I think we subtracted it all from the commercial sector. I can double check that just because we don't know the location of where the vehicles are being charged. But we made sure to subtract that so we weren't double counting. We also assumed that, or we had to assume that all charging for in-county EVs was also done in-county because we also didn't know the location of the EV charging. So we wanted to be more cautious and rather slightly overestimate the electric vehicle emissions by assigning all vehicle electricity use to the county internally or inside the county's geographical boundaries. But I can check really quick as to what sector we subtracted that from.
Questions. And I do agree with point. This is a great benchmark to have. It's great to see the trends that you've been benchmarking since 2007. And, the population's been going up, the emissions been going down, even though it's not necessarily due to things that Arlington County has done. It's it's great to see. It could have gone the other way. So it's good progress.
Yeah,
but-
and sorry, we did subtract it from the commercial electricity sector.
So, but of course, what we all want to talk about is what we're going to do next. And I'm sure that is something that we will all be talking about.
Just kind of a question for you, like, how do you see this, like really informing the climate action plan? Like, what do you think is like the big takeaway that you're like, we need to make sure that we fold this in, or that we're responding to this, or this is great information because, you know, it tells us that we need to do X for, you know, in our, or at least study X in our upcoming climate action plan.
Yeah, I think the points you all have already raised are some of the really salient ones for us, you know, looking really closely at what are the levers we can pull and versus what are the levers we can't pull but can have influence, I think are gonna be really important. I think one of the key findings too, if you go to I think it's the first results slide down, slide 11. One of the big takeaways for me is this has always been true, but 90% of our emissions are from buildings and transportation. And so when you think about, you know, where can we take the biggest chunks out of our current emissions inventory, it's those two sectors. So I think when we are looking for, you know, where are we going to get big bang for our buck as part of the planning process, you know, how do we solve some of the problems in the existing buildings, and then how do we, you know, encourage less driving or more fuel efficient driving, or electric vehicle driving, you know, these things that can really bring down the transportation sector emissions.
Now, buildings, is that totally separate from their electricity use? We're just talking about like heating and cooling with natural gas in the building sector?
This is both. So this includes both on-site gas as well as supply of electricity.
How did you compute the skip to part of it? I mean, so bigger picture, really nice report, great information, but it didn't really explain how a lot of this stuff got computed. So how did you integrate the scope 2 emissions into the other stuff? Or how did you compute scope 2 emissions? 38%?
Yeah, Vanessa, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I think I heard the question, but how did we calculate the scope 2 electricity emissions and then attribute those to each sector?
Just very briefly.
Yeah, we received that information directly from the utility. So they provided electricity use by sector, so residential, commercial, industrial. So we use that directly for each of those sectors within the building sector. And then for transportation, we estimated what we thought the EV consumption was. So that's not metered consumption. That was a bottom-up estimate, and then subtracted that electricity use from the building commercial sector as to not double count. So there's some electricity use in the transportation sector just for EVs, but the vast majority is in the building sector.
Helen.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the data. I'm seeing the like other section go up slightly. I know it's not a huge section in relation to the other ones. And just thinking about like the refrigerant emissions, I'm not very familiar with like what policies we have on the refrigerant emissions in Arlington, but also what other counties are doing to combat that. Are there things that you see people are doing or are being really effective in combating these emissions, and like what should we look at?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of key points to reiterate on this one. One is that the way we're estimating refrigerants is a sort of a top-down estimate. So we're doing that consistently with how MWCOG estimates those. So we take the national estimate and downscale that based on population. So if there are differences between how Arlington is trending on refrigerant usage versus how the national trends are, it wouldn't necessarily be captured because we don't have local data to incorporate into the inventory. And then I think the main driver right now is this legislation that the main driver for decreasing them in the future is this legislation that's in effect requiring lower GWP gases to be used as refrigerants. And Vanessa, feel free to add to or amend any of that.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why typically we don't report refrigerant emissions in community-wide inventories. It's difficult to find the data. It's usually a smaller percent of total emissions, and it's hard for local governments to influence the types of refrigerants that are used. They're more heavily impacted by state or national legislation. So for communities who have included refrigerant emissions, in their inventories, when they create a climate action plan, there's maybe one action that addresses refrigerant emissions, and it's typically about the disposal of refrigerants, so end of life of certain equipment and appliances that use refrigerants. Is there a way or a program you can create to make sure those aren't just sent to a landfill?
Thank you.
Now, oh, Rob.
Sorry, can I just add to that? So just to build on this, maybe one of the strategies, again, getting back to the climate action plan and what we can do here, education and outreach seems to be a really important part of where the county can help facilitate actions, both for homeowners. Lots of times we don't replace our air conditioner till it breaks, right? And lots of times it breaks, there was a leak and you release those HFCs, right? So if you educate consumers about, hey, if you're at 15 or 18 years in the life of your AC, you may consider replacing that AC, getting a heat pump. Then and frankly, that will help you do your research instead of just buying what's on the back of the truck when the plumber shows up to replace your AC unit. So some of it could be education outreach to consumers in the county. By the same token, we're looking at building emissions for commercial buildings and redevelopment, right? So if the county can facilitate education for developers in the county about how you can produce a net zero or close to net zero building for little or no incremental cost, because we've all seen there's plenty of developers and architect and engineering firms that do that and have those designs. But it's a matter of being proactive and educating developers about that instead of after they're at 30% or 60% design, trying to get them to go back and change designs. So getting them in the habit of doing this up front, that's one of the kind of low cost, potential high payback strategies that we can use the county to impact not just county buildings, but homeowners as well as new commercial development.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen in other jurisdictions is there's a much broader outreach in kind of the climate ecosystem around developers and financiers and everyone else to come together and figure out how to make transactions work. There's a lot of friction in the system right now, right? And so like bringing down the walls to friction and trying to get the counterparties of a particular development around the table together to figure out the best path forward. And the private sector is going to drive most of this, right? I mean, it's 97% of it is outside of the full control of the county.
Yeah, so I've kind of lost some familiar with the GPC, but thinking from the LGO or whatever they call it now, government operations profile, are we seeing counties go more into kind of a corporate reporting standard with scope 3? Because it's easy to see that there's hardly any scope 3 involved, specifically with the government operations. So all of the purchased goods and services and the finance emissions of out of county investments aren't included. So is there any move towards that in the future of including some of those?
We didn't take a specific look at including those for county operations in this round of the inventory, but I think it's a good thing to consider as part of the climate action plan, especially for government sector strategies. Raise that one for sure.
Are you guys working, the master transportation plan is being worked on, and are they, I assume, relying on this information? You guys been involved with them?
Yeah, so we briefed a number of county departments on this, including our transportation folks. So the department and the teams that are working on the master transportation plan have seen the results. They helped vet some of the assumptions that went into the transportation analysis. So yes, we work pretty closely with them there. They've seen this.
We've been arguing with not the bureau, but with the working group, that the goals have not talked about sustainability or emissions, but I think that the latest version shows some of that. Anyway, keep doing that.
It's improving, Cindy.
Yeah. Other questions? This is really good and very helpful answers.
Just observe, like people on the street who are not familiar with this, they think that vehicles are the prime cause of of greenhouse gas emissions. People don't think about like, oh, buildings.
Yeah. Yeah, especially around here. I think in some places, transportation's, you know, less, if you're in a more, less dense area. But yeah, around here, it's. Yes.
Well, I think that's really helpful for our efforts with SPRC to let the board know every time they approve a building that is inconsistent with their climate goals, like, hey, these are significant percentages. This is the one place where you have really an obvious role to step in and say, you know, we're not going to do this anymore, or we need to do better.
It's a tough trade-off when you also need the housing.
Yeah,
That's a, you know,
it is about trade-offs.
Yeah, does the report or the inventory go through any third-party assurance or audits at any point?
Not part of our process currently beyond the fact that we had an external consultant, AECOM, make sure, you know, we were doing this in accordance with the latest standards and all that, but we don't currently have any plans to do an additional third-party verification.
It's great. That part's not great. The overall report is great.
I also wanted to address, so some of the outreach strategies that we've also been doing, recently, and then, Drew, I also just wanted you to read John Bloom's comments while you're here, but so I mean, again, we've only been reaching out to the consumer level, so our residents. I think that it would be important to reach out to the, you know, the companies because they do have a higher impact, but we have done, you know, our outreach on ACs and heat pumps and making sure that, you know, obviously if it's not reaching you, it may not be reaching everyone else, but we are making those efforts to definitely, you know, help educate them and, you know, make those outreach efforts. And then similarly, when we were at the Earth Day tabling event this weekend, we did engagement on what is, you know, asking residents, what is the largest sector that produces the most emissions? And we said, we just gave them buildings, transportation, or waste. And actually, yeah, a lot of people said transportation. A couple did say buildings. So, but yeah, we were able to, you know, just educate them on a, you know, face-to-face level and just tell them a little bit more about the building sector too. So.
I think John makes a good comment in his last sentence there about making clear that electricity is not the culprit, it's the source of the power that makes the electricity. That's the greenhouse gas emitter.
That note, thank you very much, Drew.
That's right.
And Vanessa.
Thank you all.
I think we should.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So helpful to have some opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe I mentioned everybody should have got an email from Jenna last week with links to the, it sounds like a lot of you already looked at the reports, but we also have some interactive dashboards on the website that should please take a look at those. Just if you have questions.
And I think this website in particular that Jenna just set up, we tried today because we're all very interested in greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to make a website for folks who may not be as interested. So we have another graphic that, you know, that we're working on. So we tried to make it a little for folks who aren't as curious as we are. So we're trying to just kind of put it out there for more of the general public too. So that was our aim for that.
I better see however many hits tomorrow on the website.
Times there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you.
To stay with it. Are you trying to calculate your path out?
Trying to remember where I left my backpack.
Thank you.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So for the next part, the next goal, so greenhouse gas is a huge chunk of this meeting. The next goal chunk is on SPRCs, which nicely just teed up. So we'll talk about a variety of things. We did originally have 2 SPRC letters on the agenda, and we took them both off. Ultimately, one still shows as being on because the county board isn't considered those who will after our next bite at it, and because I think you know, and I will let both Melissa and Trevor talk about their. I think Trevor, yours was just you have the extra time, so use it. But maybe there's more. But Melissa was finding that, you know, she asked for all this. There was just no information After the meeting, she asked the questions. They were like, yeah, we haven't decided.
It's a quirk of the financing that we haven't made those decisions yet, like over and over again.
Yeah.
Which is interesting
No
response.
density for you.
So, but the signals were all super positive, so I don't wanna give a really harsh score like that.
Like,
Doesn't
seven.
feel correct to me.
Right, so then we talked about doing the letter without the chart, but I really thought we've trained the county board to look for the numerical score, which makes it objectively comparable. Even though I know our last letter, we had a paragraph that said they were so close in so many categories and they just missed, and so their score is lower than it probably should be, so we're undercutting ourselves there. But yeah, to have a project that you thought was great and really made it hitting on a lot of projects, and to give it a 57, which is one of the lowest scores we've given in years, didn't seem. So we pulled it today, in case you're wondering. I can find it on the agenda. And that's the reason why. And I'm not sure it'll be better in May. We may have to, so one possibility would be they've said they want to do the 25% GBIP. We would just assume that they're going to meet all of those criteria and give them the credit for it. But if they don't know that, it seems a little, and Joe, I know you ran into problems like this with your project too. So I'm throwing the discussion open. And I don't know, Trevor, I think your issues were different, but you tell me.
I mean, we had more information, I think, than what was in there. I mean, ours is 2,500 Wilson, or mine's 2,500 Wilson.
Yeah.
Which looks like a really nice, brand new apartment building right on Wilson, right? It's got an old office complex now. And the developer seems very well established and thoughtful around most of this stuff. But it just felt like in a lot of the disclosure, it was, well, we'll do this. And you're like, well, like, how much of it are you going to do? And what are you going to, and they weren't prepared for those types of questions, or at least it certainly wasn't in print. And so then I kind of had to make a judgment about how much of the meeting do I dominate by asking more questions first. Like but
Be that person.
but no, I think I'm a little bit further along, and we'll follow up with questions, and hopefully I'll be ready for May.
I know that Joan sent a note when we were all saying that she hasn't had good luck with them giving you more information. I've submitted lots of questions to developers. I haven't avoided protocol by going directly to the developers. So when they come to the meetings, you get to know them. But I've gone through county staff and said, could you send these? And they have, and they've answered them generally.
Okay, so I did not submit questions through county staff. That's a good tip. Next part of the agenda, I will do that.
Yeah.
But also, I kind of see this a different way. Like, if you have no plans or no thought that you've
Right, we're
given
not
to
gonna
the
do it.
sustainability of your building, then I have to assume that you're not going to suddenly develop the entire mindset that is necessary to deliver a building that is actually meeting our sustainability goals. So I would say, if it's going before the board and all these questions are left unanswered, then we would assume that they're going to do the cheapest, most economical path that is not necessarily going to incorporate sustainability, and they would get that score. And I think that if they're falling short from intent to execution.
I agree with you. Like I said, Joan mentioned that maybe just give them they say they're going to do GBIP, give them all points for that. But if they don't know how they're going to do it or what they're going to do it, I think your project, which Alex also was part of, it was a smaller project, and so they only had one SPRC meeting, and they usually don't even get to sustainability in the first SPRC meeting. So I don't know, maybe they just don't know what the process, but and that really limited your ability to go after them for that information too, I think.
Yeah.
Not to suggest you weren't there asking, because I know you were.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to note that it's like affordable 3-bedroom houses, which is super rare in Arlington. They're redeveloping just this like ugly hill and just putting some multifamily units there. They talked a lot about biophilia during the meeting. So like they care about that. They had a landscaper who was talking about like making sure the tree canopy connects under the sidewalks, and like it sounded good. And they talked about doing GBIP and being excited about it. And then following with specifics, they were like kind of asked a question and they all stared at each other. So it felt to me like the intent was aligned, but It's also my first meeting, so.
Prep. Well, the other thing, and Cindy, I don't mean to hijack this, but like, it might be helpful at some point, maybe now's not the right time. Maybe I don't know if it's Jason or Jenna can help us try to understand the internal GVIP process, because what it feels like to me is that developers make certain assertions, and that's okay because the internal GVIP process, they're gonna check it later down the road. But we're having to draft a letter based on kind of just higher level assertions. Yeah, we're gonna do that, or we're gonna try. And so like, it feels like our comments are coming in earlier than maybe stuff is getting verified a few months down the road. And so, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But I guess that's just a structure element of the process.
But, you know, I also don't know that it's necessarily, that I necessarily buy the idea that if this is supposed to be affordable housing, then, you know, we don't want to add, you know, these bells and whistles for sustainability that increase the price. I mean, the price of housing is because of market, not because, you know, you used more efficient materials or, you know, and people who are looking for affordable housing are people who their energy bill is a much larger share of their income than, you know, anybody who can, I guess, afford to be here on a Monday night. So I don't know that it's fair to give them a pass because it's affordable housing, and I know maybe the board feels differently, but I don't think this is nickel and diming. I think the broader problem is how much homes cost and what people are willing to pay to live in Arlington, not that they've got a more sustainable home that has electric heat instead of gas.
Completely agree. And of course, the more sustainability building, the cheaper it is for people to live in affordable housing over the long term.
Right.
And I just think it's, you know, a lot of the affordable housing funding, like the low income housing tax credits, require all the sustainability. So we generally find that our affordable housing projects score the highest.
There is a little bit of an agency issue as it relates to affordable housing, at least in the things that we've done. Like it meaning that like the developer or the asset owner isn't paying the utility bills of an individual metered unit, right? So like if they lower that cost, like it's not going to their profit and loss statement per se. Right now, obviously there are affordability metrics and other things that may help, but it's not a one for one.
Right. Joe, did you want to say something? Then we'll.
Yeah, I won't get into affordable housing because I work in housing and say anything, but I do think it's kind of a slippery slope to because of where we are in the process of this to say, well, I don't think they've thought out the full details of how they're going to meet GBIP, because even the thought out plans that like I've reviewed, one half bullet on the slide that says bird friendly glass, you give points for it, and tomorrow they could just delete that and then our letter's already done. So it's not really always a great process. Yeah. All electric, and then the energy model is not that.
Yeah. Oh, those won't be electric. Those won't be electric. Like, you have to change this. It says all electric. And 2 words on the whole sustainability, not enough. Especially if they're not even true.
I mean, our checklist is kind of public, right? I mean,
It's available.
so like developers could just, before the meeting, they should be able to go through the checklist and say, hey, what do I mean, we've given them the roadmap.
Yeah, we're trying.
What's the process later on to hold their feet to the fire, make sure they follow through?
Oh, Jason and Jen are involved. Yeah, that's their responsibility.
Right.
I learned something interesting today. So internally, we're having some conversations and education with the site plan, but for internal staff, because, you know, there's this whole public benefits piece, and you can't have 20 staff asking for 20 different public benefits because there's only a smaller package that the manager will ultimately recommend. But one thing stuck out, and it's related to this conversation, is so there's horizontal and vertical engineering, right? So the horizontal, civil engineering is only at like 60% for a site plan, but the vertical is much less, 20% maybe, if that. Like, it's very conceptual. So to your point, you're engaging in part of the process where they haven't designed, done all this stuff. It's really more design and farther along. They're very early on in that process. So you're gonna get the answers of like.
Maybe, but to Elizabeth's point, if all they have to do is be, and Trevor's point too, if all they have to do is be conceptual show up at a meeting and say, yes, we plan to do this, and they're not even doing that, then you really don't know what their plans are.
The gap though.
I mean, I think there's two places where we maybe want to engage. One is like, what's your intent? Like, do you even care about any of this? And second, if you have cared about it, did you actually execute it that way? And if not, why not? And are there ways that we can engage to figure out why you intended to do it this way, but ended up doing it this way? And what were the pressures on you?
Right.
Were they site specific? Were they economic? You know,
Like an after action.
kind of.
Yeah,
Um,
but we've talked a lot about how we come too late in the process, that they've already baked everything, and now I'm hearing us say we're coming too early in the process. So
Little both, right?
it is. I mean, everybody's right about both those things.
maybe it's useful for us to be early in the process and be kind of like, fly in the ointment or, buzzing in the ear and be like, have you thought about these things? And maybe the answer is no, but maybe the next time you do think about them.
Somebody open it, where's that? I'm sorry. So with that backdrop, let's go to the SPRC, like magic, it's here. So the SPRC checklist, and anybody on the phone who has a question, raise your hand or feel free to shout out, because we're all looking away from the screen at various times. So I think we've discussed this at a number of meetings. How do we update our chart? And I think that the small working group, which consists of Rob, Melissa, Doug, John, and me. Not to say that everybody agrees with every word on this chart, but I think that we should think about adopting this, and I think tonight we should also talk, hopefully we can do that, and then we should also talk about how do we transition to this? How do we educate developers? How do we post it? How do we let the county board, planning commission know? And how do we show some kind of bridge from what we're doing now to, but anyway, so we've talked about most of the changes that we've made over time. So one of the things that I wanted to talk, we could just sort of scroll through. We've got on the lead point, we've got we talked about going to lead 5.0 and just being really advanced. But what we've done is stick with lead 1 in most places and say that we're going to automatically, it says that it will automatically upgrade to 5.0 when 5.0 is adjusted. We've added waste diversion. You see under certification, waste diversion, 75% construction waste diversion for meats and 85%. So that's a new criterion that we talked about. Let's keep scrolling. In my greenness, did not print it out. Building materials, we are using 5.0 here. You can see we've got comments here. Just because, I don't know, Melissa, I think you worked in this, but I think we just thought it was a good place to be stringent and it was easily understood. Energy optimization, we went into 4.1 and earlier drafts we've been at 5.0. Energy Star is pretty much the same. What we did, because some of these projects are not doing green building, and that introductory paragraph talks about this, even, some of these standards are the same, and this is one of the issues I want to talk about tonight. Some of these standards are the same as the green building inventory standards, but green building incentive policy standards. But we just printed them out because we found that where people weren't going for GBIP and we'd ask them, well, are you doing X, Y, Z? They had no idea what we're talking about. So we just copied it in. So energy meters, that's basically the same. This electrification, we heard there was a healthy debate about electrification is really what it's all about. We weighted this more heavily, and I'll talk about weighting in a minute. But we have these standards. We had talked at the last meeting about whether there should be a less strict standard for buildings over 12 stories because it's more expensive and more technologically difficult right now. And we end up deciding, no, we're not giving them an exceeds if it's a 12-story building. and they can't do make work, we're still not giving them exceeds. So renewable energy, I moved that up here. There's nothing different about it. And then we have the same things we had before. Hot water heating, HVAC, electric cooking. So those are all very similar, and we still have the electric vehicles. We haven't changed those. This next section, electricity from renewable sources, we dropped that entirely. This battery energy storage has been picked up and it's subsumed in a category that's further up. And that just left renewable energy here, which seemed like just to have a thing with just one. So we moved it up to electrification and changed the name to electrification and renewable energy. Let's keep going. Joe?
Yeah.
And we adopted Joe's suggestion that RECs, the mere purchase of RECs is not enough.
So I don't know about like the geographical layout of Arlington, geothermal. But I see it says on-site recs, but if there's geothermal or other available.
Too about geothermal.
Well, that's why it's instead of electrification, maybe it should say decarbonization.
It said like the exceed says on-site solar, but what if it's a site that's gonna do full geothermal or something?
This has been that. So let's go to, yeah, there. So on-site solar. And we want to change it to, want to type into on-site solar or full geothermal
Or equivalent,
or equivalent.
Yeah.
or equivalent, in
Yeah.
parentheses,
I mean, just-
geothermal.
But
Equivalent,
geothermal,
not generating anything for the.
but we want to say or equivalent, but not RECs. That's why meets allows you to just purchase. That was what that equivalent, I think, was. And now we wanted to say, if you want to get exceeds, but yeah, we can play with words, but equivalent, e.g. geothermal, maybe, but not RECs.
Has anybody seen much in the way of rooftop renewable energy on any of their projects? I mean, it seems to me, at least with mine, that the rooftop is a very valuable kind of gathering community space, and it's not that big.
The apartments, yeah. I mean, I've seen some green roofs on some of these, but I haven't seen a lot of big solar. So we'll play with that. So let's scroll back down.
And just to note, like geothermal is not gonna generate electricity on a like residential building, right? I mean, it's an efficiency measure that's gonna dramatically reduce your heating and cooling costs and electricity needed, but it's not an equivalent to solar, which would be generating power for the building that it's on.
So
I think we changed, my suggestion before was to change this was to renewable energy instead of renewable electricity, because geothermal, and you can have solar hot water heating too, which is also providing heat and not necessarily electricity. But then that changes the category.
on-site energy, on-site energy, and then.
Yeah, and I think we say
On-site
renewable
energy.
energy on the left, not renewable electricity, right? So I think we're covered.
Oh, over words.
Yeah,
We
right,
just- we
yeah,
just already say renewable energy.
right.
So we're covered. Okay. All right, so that looks good. So let's scroll back down to biophilia. I think that's where we were. So biophilia, there's, the stuff in green is more specific, the tree canopy goal, stormwater, so on. There's not really changes. Stormwater, remember you say meet Virginia Building Code, we made a little stricter, a little more specific. But it turns out Virginia Building Code is pretty good. Jason, you probably know more about that. So I was going to, if we keep going, I was just about to suggest that we really de-emphasize this dark sky thing when I got an email, which I sent to the working group that was like, from somebody not related to the commission, it's like, this dark sky is so important to human health and so important to wildlife and so important to this, and nobody pays any attention to dark sky. I was like, I was about to delete dark sky. Okay,
Because of your.
see, I'm leaving it in here.
What percentage was that?
It's 5. They're all, so we'll go, let's talk about, let's rolling through here. I think we're almost done. And yeah, we are done. So let's go all the way to the top, and there's a comment in purple. And in the, keep going to the top. There, all criteria are now weighted at 5 points, except for the 5 criteria under electrification renewables, which are each weighted at 7 points. So Electrification is super important, so that's 35% of the whole. Everything else is 5%, so dark sky, bird. So if you make changes, any changes, we had the problem before that if you made a lot of changes in that bottom category, your score didn't change even by 1. It just did not change. But now, if you make changes in any of these categories, your score should change. Let's scroll to the bottom. The other thing we really wrestled with, and that we've all talked about as a group, is the DEI, which we're now calling community and environmental justice. And we thought, and I think Doug, you've spoken on it at these meetings in particular, that it's just very hard for us to know what this is. And so where we are now is that you get a bonus for community environmental justice and up to 7 points. So as Doug pointed out, if you're scoring on a basis of 100, but you can get 7 bonus points, then really you're scoring on a basis of 107. But which is mathematically correct, right? But it's very hard for us. We threw in, and Melissa put a lot of thought into this, but like just affordable housing, or there's all kinds of things. But it is going to be more of a, we know it when we see it, and that's why I thought doing it as a bonus and not arguing that it's completely, because like we gave the Goodwill Project tons of points because they had trial, and I was not involved in that, but they had childcare, they had on-site, all kinds of stuff. And so the people who work in that SPRC were like, we're giving them tons of points for that. But that's not really sustainability. That's not really, but it does matter to the whole community. And as I said before, the affordable housing tends to be among our highest scoring projects. So the weighting, the DEI, those are the big things. And then there's a footnote at the bottom we should discuss. Let's stop and talk about the weighting and DEI as a bonus.
I would really love to see it be at least somewhat connected to environmental justice and not just like kind of aligned with where we are politically.
Let's go down. Let's see what we say. Serving local underserved communities a little further.
So I wrote this before doing an SPRC. I don't think it's as realistic now that I've done. I haven't finished one, but now that I'm reading it, I'm like, maybe this is not gonna work. But it sounds really good.
Well, I do think there are probably other commissions and groups that would be,
Better able to do this.
Articulating the benefits of these type of things.
What is environmental justice?
Well, it wouldn't really be connected to like an individual site in any way that I understand the concept. It might be something where, the previous, if they're demolishing a building that had like an on-site gas diesel generator or something, and to make up for past environmental harms to the community, they're doing something else. But it'd be like very difficult within the context of a single site to have an environmental justice component that really makes any sense.
It tends to be geographically based. So like, low to moderate income census tracts that are getting sustainability investments, like that's something that I think would fall in the environmental justice category. So like trying to ensure that not all of the GBIP flows into North Arlington, right? Like there should be, if we're going to maintain the category, it should be, are we finding ways to incentivize projects in other parts of the county as well that are less wealthy than North Arlington and the Orange Line corridor? But we're such a small jurisdiction as well. It's hard.
We don't have a lot of we don't have a lot of industrial facilities. Where are you putting a low income housing project next to that highly emitting oil refinery? We don't really have oil refineries.
Right. We do have the sewage treatment plant, the bus depot, all that's on the same place in South Arlington. He has a South Arlington resident. So I'm totally open. So there's the one way to go is just not to include this, given the countywide, the county board resolution on equity as a, whole of government, whole of community approach. And the fact that we've had it before, it seems like a bad time to just toss it out, given everything that is happening politically,
Well,
but trying to make it meaningful.
what about,
It's
what about
hard.
leaving it really, really open to the interpretation of the commissioner that's working on it? Say like, is there anything in this site plan that isn't captured here, but nevertheless
It would
You know.
even more, I know it when I see it.
a little bit?
Yeah. This
And
is
pure bonus points? I think that makes sense.
okay.
I think it gets kind of confusing because again, it's just confusing small projects because they could write a plan that's a couple sentences saying we're gonna build affordable housing in this area, in this census tract, but we're gonna burn oil on the front lawn. So like, do you give them points because they're building affordable housing within that area, or is the environmental factor also?
What factor
Key to it.
is, construction or operation that's underserved communities or whatever. And, in an environmental, people who put in stuff that make these affordable housing cheaper for the people to live in over long term. I mean, there are things that are environmental, that are project specific that people can do. Employing people of underserved communities might not be environmental, but putting heat pumps in every apartment might be.
It's also whether or not the county has those people to do that work or not, right? I mean, again, we're a fairly small area. It's not like saying, hey, go source those contractors from all over the state. I mean, it's a tough.
Maybe you can look at it from the affordable housing perspective as well as whether they, for example, in the retail spaces that they have, can allocate one of them for renting to an NGO, renting to a small business, something like that, that creates community and it is serving the underserved. And that would be kind of brownie points rather than just.
Right, I think that's sort of what we, affordable housing, employment practices, retail leasing to small businesses that are, had the retail being minority-owned businesses.
Don't you think it would have to be at least somewhat connected to environmental justice or sustainability, or there's some connection? If this commission is gonna give bonus points, I think it should probably be more like 3 rather than 7.
3 is fine with
But
me.
like,
I cut it down from 10,
something.
maybe 5.
To give you an example, like the SPRC that I was on, what they put in their presentation, DEI on design team.
Yeah.
Like that's
That's what we used to have in the checklist. It said, that there's.
Oh, so they got one person of color.
The developer had a
wonderful.
DEI plan. They didn't even, that's what we've been doing. So people got tons of points that are even more meaningless than this.
Yeah.
So,
We're gonna have our representatives at the SPRC meeting, and if there's a give and take, and if one of the developers' representatives asks our representative, oh, what do we have to do to get the 7 bonus points for DEI? What are we supposed to say?
I'll know it when I see it.
knock me out. Yeah.
Please me. Please me. But I'm not giving any clues what we please.
Isn't the county providing all sorts of other incentives for DEI type initiatives? I don't know why it needs to be part of our.
I don't know.
Well, one way you look at it, just the whole affordable housing push within the county is has a huge.
Can you push the door? Push it. Push the door.
Huge effort
Push.
for it.
It's always closed.
So.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that means no, well, at least all housing projects.
I do that and sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I just don't, it's trying to make a square peg fit.
Right.
Yeah.
Dropping equity now when it's always been in there, given the political climate. I hate to do that.
We really think anybody's gonna notice.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
Could we say, well, where else it's covered, like which other commissions? So we just think this is duplicative, but we should name it where else this is gonna be picked up.
Yeah.
So it's not just dropped altogether.
What if we drop the bonus points to 5 and we just say something even bigger than this? Although we've come up with some examples.
I think what you can do is the bonus, and then you can say, here are like a few examples that we would find interesting. Because environmental justice is a real thing. And like in other grants, you're 100% correct that it's like, sourcing the correct EPCs that have or small businesses. And if we're going to source locally in Arlington, that's just it's just gonna be too much of a stick, basically. So I like the idea of know it when you see it. We can have a list in our SOPs of like, here are some cool examples that we have seen or we would encourage if asked that question. But I've only been to one meeting, but I doubt they're gonna ask us how they get 3 bonus points or are they not?
Yeah, Joe.
Depends on
Right.
I know, our checklist right now is not on, it's not on the C2E2 county website, is it?
If completed, many examples of completed ones are, we could put.
At least now at this meeting.
Yeah.
If it's not there before, it's yeah.
You have to drill down to an agenda or a meeting report to find one. It's not like, oh, and here's the
Oh, we could put it.
checklist we use for.
It's on all of our letter, like if you go to our letters, it's there, all the.
Oh, it's attached.
But back, Joe, were you?
Yeah, so if this is a bonus, there's meets and exceeds. So we're gonna do 1 point for meets, 3 for
No,
exceeds.
so means it's
Okay.
gone. This would just be, it would be, I didn't do the formatting, but it would, if we get back. So you're showing us that all the templates are, but let's go back to the checklist. Scroll down. So the stuff that's in red is gone.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, so the green stuff was our proposal for, so nothing for meets, bonus points. We in our group talked about 10, we said 5 to 10. Well, I went with 7, I'm hearing 3.
Maybe
five.
needs would be something like doesn't contribute to known environmental inequities, like we're not putting.
I don't want to do bonus points for the needs, but if we add it back in, then maybe it would make sense to make needs, but if we're giving a bonus, you should do something positive.
And I would want it to be connected to like, I don't know, something site specific.
That's
Writing some kind of wrong that is environmental as opposed to like the theme that's being put together. There's just no real nexus to what we're.
So it's cemetery in the middle of the YMCA project. I don't think it's contains, I think, I don't know if that family was African American, but if it was, then maybe preserving that cemetery would be.
Yes, and
And
I think it would be very specific to the history of that site and.
But not on every site will have the option to get those points, right? So it's kind of, yeah.
Well, do you make an interesting point? Do we know where GVIP has actually been done? Is it all in North Arlington and there's no one in South Arlington? Then it would just be like location.
So a prime example would be the project I just did, the Pentagon Hotel one. Yeah, there's a historically black church right next to it with the cemetery. And so one of the closest things they did was work with the church and all the leaders to preserve the cemetery, attribute funds to it, preserve throughout the entire construction process, not to disturb any of the graves, to put in greenery along the lines there. So, and to eliminate balconies on the side facing the church. So when people come to church on Sunday, there's not people just chatting on the roofs and stuff like that. So they did a lot to do that. And all I could really do in the letter was say, we applaud this, but not able to give any points. So I do see
There's our example.
Yeah.
Like, don't put your balconies.
over the church and the cemetery. Yeah.
But that's a good example of like something that this particular project had to contend with. They considered it, they cared about it, they.
And not every project. So in our scoring, we could say, they got a score of 74 plus they got 5 bonus points for equity, which not every project could get.
But that's also kind of, it's not fully environmental, right? That's a nice thing to do for a historical location and such, but like.
There were some the greenery, and they built a park essentially along the side of it. So it's like.
It's a pretty great example.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
Now is Pentagon, sorry, house?
Pentagon Hotel. I don't know what it is.
So as we look at, EI is always going to be difficult. That's why we thought that this was sort of a compromise. The weighting otherwise, what do people think about the weighting? So 35% electrical, everything else comes out, depends on how many things are in there, but
You got
like.
18 total categories plus a bonus categories. You got 19 total categories that we're scoring this on.
Yep.
Just the KISS rule should apply.
Well,
Maybe some of these can be consolidated.
Combined.
some of them have been, I think this is simpler than what it has been. So are we going to knock this down to 5? What's this consensus on how many bonus points? 5?
Sure.
I think 5 sounds good.
Okay.
Up to 5 is fine, I guess.
Up to 5. We'll work on the language. Okay, so.
But definitely the most important thing should be electrification because, you know, once something is baked in with a.
Decarbonization.
40 years or.
I mean, there can be geothermal.
And then we also, I mean, we don't want to, we have a separate category for electric vehicles, which we think is important. There's other things that are important. Let's look at this footnote. And Rob, do you want to talk about this footnote?
Yeah, I mean, I think previously what that left column was trying to list the GBIP requirements and then also denote when C2E2 was going beyond the GBIP requirements with a particular criterion. And now we're not trying to tie, it sounds like, at all to GBIP. We're just saying this is our baseline requirement as C2E2, right? Is that
Right, that's right, especially because GBIP supposedly will be completely different. So if we want to stop using our current checklist and keep going, we can't tie it to GBIP because GBIP will change.
but we can update and say where there is an overlap between ours and whatever, whether it's GBIP current or GBIP future, we can footnote if one of our criteria is consistent with or the same as the GBIP criteria. So it flips it around.
Not that easy because there are those 4 levels of GBIP. I think
Yeah,
it's
it's true.
1.25, 0.35, 0.45, 0.65, whatever it is. Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting, Elizabeth.
I'm used to it.
Very much agree. Very much agree with her point, which is that what we've been calling electrification, which I would suggest might be more accurately characterized as decarbonization to take into account geothermal, should be more than just 35% of our total.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what the reduction of like gas directly to the building, because once you have that pipeline in, it becomes very difficult to get it out. And
We almost doubled it from what it was before.
Yes, and it's not exclusive to other categories such as the transportation electrification, such as even achieving the lead criteria, right? So it's accounted for. It's not a minimum 35%. It's actually embedded in some of the other criteria as well. It's hard to actually distinguish them because we have so many categories. You just take the lead criteria itself, and that's duplicated with some of the things, but we're going beyond what's in lead for some of these. So I think we're safe in that we're accounting for and pushing for a lot of decarbonization, electrification, all these criteria.
Yeah.
There's 35% of exclusive kind of decarbonization.
There is definitely
Plus
some
bonus and other
push that electrification was getting way too much.
Yeah.
So.
So if we approve this today or next month, are we gonna send out a newsletter or are we just gonna start grading people based on?
Should. I think that's, so how do we do this? I think next month I would bring a letter forward that would go to the planning commission and the county board that would say, we feel that our checklist was not, was wonderful for its time, but the technology of buildings and everything is changing so fast. Climate change itself is changing so fast. We are changing our criteria. We propose, and this was a suggestion of Rob's that I really like, that we do like scoring on the old and the new for some transition period and give them both for a few months or a few projects so they get the hang of it. But we can have to write a letter saying what we changed, not word by word, but what are the key things that we changed and how we changed the weighting and how this will, and that this is what we're going to do. And then we would, so I think it would be letters and then transition.
So I understand the whole like doing one and the other and showing them to them. but just doing one can
Is a lot of
be
work.
a lot of work. So having two and then asking the developer, do you meet this? Do you meet this? Do you meet this? Do you?
So maybe just letters and then reference it in our letters going forward that as a reminder, we have changed these scores are not. I think we grandfather in all the projects that people are currently working on.
If you've gotten to the second meeting.
Yeah, I think
It's only-
one Roslyn, which Lily's going to the second meeting this week, might make the cut. Joan is at the Ballston one tonight. So I don't know, we can decide if we want to do those. We might need a little more time. We haven't even passed it yet. But yeah, I agree.
Let's say I agree with Joe. And
Yeah.
Respect. Yeah, having two, I mean, I've never done one of these before, and it's gonna be a big job for me, the first one. And having two different scoring things is gonna totally get my head.
You're gonna be in for some fun, Doug.
I'll defend it just so that we can, get a baseline for maybe the first half dozen or so that we do these for. I'm not saying we submit those scorecards. The check boxes, you're gonna do these simultaneously. A lot of the boxes are the same or quite similar, but you have to know what the new score is versus the old score, right? So I'm not saying we can still submit only the scorecard for the new one, but say, hey, we scored this in the old criteria and it's a 57, and this new one, it's a 63. And so you get an idea for how and are these gonna be or some of them, one's gonna be a 57, another one's gonna be 85, and then for a different price. So we kind of get an idea for how we're doing.
Well,
Yeah, it's an internal kind of exercise to do this. Yeah, no, just both. Just get, hey, here's our new scoring criteria. By the way, this scored using our old criteria X, right? So you have some baseline to get used to the new.
it might also be helpful if we were using percentages before to have like a raw score, like a number that's not a percent out of 100. Like, and the percentage thing never quite made sense to me. Percent of what would 100 be, but like out of points instead of a percentage. Might like signal to the reader that like this is, different from the way it was previously scored.
This ever percentages, but I
thought it was.
But we can make it clear in the.
Never mind, strike my comments from the record.
Could be wrong. So a general sense. Do we have a general sense of wanting to approve this new checklist? Are we ready to recognize that we have to change DEI? We have to change community and environmental justice to be less specific.
So we're also going to strike for carbon neutrality on the.
Yeah, I struck it multiple times and it keeps coming back.
Just because that meets doesn't get us to carbon neutrality.
I noticed it right before I came to this meeting, I took it out again. It's up on my computer right now without that. Take the whole thing out. Not just, we can leave minimum criteria, but it's a little worrisome. Wonder what other of my changes haven't been saved. So we can try to do a footnote of GPIP. I am worried about how to do that because of the 4 different levels of the current GPIP.
Yeah, I think we should take it out, but just say this scorecard is separate and distinct from the GPIP or something, just so.
We do say that at the top. We say because because the criteria, because many of these projects don't do GBIP, we've made our whole separate, that's with that green stuff at the top, so. Okay, so can I have a motion to accept this subject to the discussion of tonight?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we're working, I will do my best to bring a letter to the next County Board of Planning. Kevin?
In the letter, we tackle the question of making sure after we score the buildings that they actually implement the features that are scored.
Boy, that is a
When
great
you're going
question.
to the SPRC process, why don't these migrate over to site conditions that are approved by the county? I mean, there is a mechanism to do that, right?
Right, and maybe they do.
Do they become site conditions? I mean, you're saying that we worry about it not being implemented. I mean, those are enforceable. If you got site conditions. I don't
think the line should be, and leave you in charge of these are enforced, because it is something that county staff does work on, not the air team, but the HPD.
Is the question of whether a commitment made here becomes a site plan condition? Is that the question?
Well, commitment made in the SPRC process, not just me. Yeah, not just to us. I mean, I get
It's
that.
part of just the broader commitment.
Yeah, if they say they're gonna get an Energy Star score of 85, or they're gonna divert waste 85% of construction waste.
Well, you said they're gonna put 15% EV
EV
charging.
parking, yeah.
Let's make sure they show up.
Biophilia, bird-friendly glass.
Right,
So,
all of this.
Is there a way to come back, like for accountability reasons, to check back in with them? Like after?
They have no reason to pay us the slightest attention after the county board.
Could we, well, could we make it know?
I mean, I mean, I think this is a bigger picture issue.
Is there a developer that frequently works in Arlington? Could we make like a note and be like, okay, well, they have shown a history of not fully.
And some of that does, like I've heard that, oh, these developers swear they're gonna plant all these trees, and they do, and they're all dead within 2 years because they don't maintain them. So that reputation, so you're onto something there. That reputation does follow them. Tree killing developer.
Yeah, negative 10 for liars.
Yeah, yeah, negative bonus points.
So
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I do think then it gets back to the confusing point of, I know it when I see it, because they would be scoring on some of these, I know it when I see it, and how do they, like, if they have to enforce this whole thing?
But if they say they're gonna rent, 3 of their retail outlets to reserved, small business owners, that is something you can, with it might not be sustainability, but it is something we can confirm. So I think it's a great question. I'm not sure we can answer it in this, but we could add, we could have a sentence saying we continue to be concerned and we recommend this. But I want to talk with Jason's help and Jenna's help to somebody to understand how things do become site conditions, because I don't know.
We had a representative of the business developer community. That person would probably know immediately the answer to our question.
They probably
Able to
would.
explain it to us.
Exactly.
I think I'm sorry, I think it's a great idea to include at least a signal in the letter that, what we discussed tonight, that we seem to be, too early in some cases and too late in others for this. So maybe for our work plan for next year, we look at how we change the processes so that we're doing the education outreach to developers and making sure that they know on the front end what our expectations are, give them this checklist, right? And say, here's what we'd be grading on. And we also have some ability to go back, hey, maybe, after your site's built, you come and give the C2E2 members a tour of your facility and show us all how you met all the things on the checklist that we scored, right? And that assumes people are gonna be around 2 or 3 years later. But it learns the current numbers.
Yeah, but maybe like once a year, we kind of go through like, what's everything that was built in 2023? What was our checklist at the time? Did they follow through? And is there a pattern that emerges from that of like, none of these were followed through, or, or we've learned that typically what they say they're gonna do before the, approval is what they end up doing, or, but I think it does make sense to learn more about how the journey from a discussion at a meeting into a site condition. That would be important information.
I do think if we start doing on-site inspections, we should collect the salary.
So I think it's been a big process. I thank the people who worked on it, Melissa, Joan, because it's very different from what it was, and hopefully better. So we'll see how it goes when we start using it, and whether the information is easier to get. I don't know that it will be. So as I look at our agenda, we've got a couple of things. Let's go ahead and approve the March meetings. I know, Jenna, I put in comments and you've already accepted them. I don't know if anybody, did you get comments from anybody else?
I didn't see any other comments.
I looked before this meeting. Oh,
I think
yeah, I looked at some and then my comments. Anyway,
your
so
comments.
I think my comments were minor. So can I have a motion to accept the minutes of the March meeting? Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Opposed, okay. All right, so that's done. I was gonna talk about the work plan, but I do want, since we're on the SPRC, we're on a roll. I'd like Melissa, you all got an email from Melissa with standard operating procedures to try to bring,
It's
try
pretty
to
sexy, I know.
try to standardize the way we do the FPRC, because having a standard objective of for all the reasons we've all been discussing is really critical. And I really thank Melissa for trying to bring order to this process as a newbie who was like, wow, I have no idea how to do this. I have no idea how to do this. I wonder what people think about this approach. So, Alicia?
Beautiful. Yeah. So full disclosure, I haven't finished my first SPRC and I wrote these before my first meeting. So this was me trying to kind of grok what we're trying to achieve. And so I pulled this together from chatting with Cindy, Joan, and then copying and pasting what you guys had written in emails and like previous meetings. So I am super down for lots of feedback. I anticipate a lot of this is not quite accurate. And once I finish my full process, I'll, do a second look. But it kind of comes together. I think most interesting parts to look at would be kind of like, what is our group intent behind this? Maybe that's more clear than I realize it being, but can we all agree we know what the purpose of it is? Like, how do we define these buildings? And then there is some key resources that I collected that might be missing some, but were really helpful for me. And then at the very end, if everyone could even spend 5 or 10 minutes and write down their top tips and tricks they've learned from their SPRCs, it'd be really great if we could all help each other out with, what if you go to a meeting and they don't answer any of your questions? Like, what do you do?
So here's a silly question. Can we just bring a copy of the checklist to the first meeting
Sure.
and leave it and say, listen, here's what I'm going to ask you about next meeting? Because I mean, I think it would just organize them so much more. Because otherwise, we're, at least in mine, I'm just getting one high level bullet points and then stuff that wasn't even discussed. And then you're like, well, am I going to have to use airtime to just go through all these questions? And there's just not enough time.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Even to say, these are things that I'm going to be looking for. Are they in your materials somewhere?
Yeah.
If so, I'll look at them. But I already looked at them and I didn't find any of them, like zero.
The materials are so hard to find. I mean,
It could be helpful to, if there are types of documents that typically have, like, this kind of information is normally found in the, initial presentation to the county, or this type of information is typically found in the appendix to the site plan,
Yeah.
But if we make known, like, these are the things we're looking for, if we don't, identify them, that it impacts your score because we assume that you don't care and we assume that, you're not meeting the criteria. So, kind of putting people on notice that we need this information and it affects their score. So, I mean, the first meeting that I went to, whatever, I can't remember what I suggested, but they were like, we're not talking about sustainability in this meeting. I was like, I am. And I will be. But, even knowing where it's okay to speak up is kind of challenging.
Yeah, the sustainability is in the second meeting, except there was only one meeting. So, sustainability gets pushed and sustainability often gets pushed. But yeah.
I did talk about sustainability, to be fair.
But you have to the people are good at this. The land use, okay, well, that's not about where are you going on the borders of the site, land use, let's talk about biophilia. I mean, you just shove that stuff into the category, but it's.
I tried and they were like, we're not there yet, this isn't the right time, and I was like, it's always the right time.
I do agree with you, it is hard.
I think Joan should put some step-by-step through like the energy models and the technical supporting documents, because she's like, oh, this is what that said, and I'm reading it. I'm like, I don't know where that is. Yeah.
So I'll say, maybe we can just give some more examples too, because one of the ones that I did had a whole section, this is maybe gold standard, like of sustainability documentation. And it had the energy models and it had everything run through it. And then I was going down the checklist. I'm like, okay, that's all. And it was really easy to do. And then another one, probably like
one page, one PowerPoint slide with some bullets. That was it.
So, but if we can show that sustainability, like here, I mean, and now it's public information. So, hey, here's the sustainability documentation that this project submitted. And so it's just an example for others.
Do you remember which site that was?
don't, but I'll go back. It
Crystal-
might have been red.
Crystal CW. No, was it before that? That was
No,
one
I think it
thing.
was, what was the hotel on 50, the red,
That's fine.
yeah, red line, it might have been red line.
Mine also had that Hotel Pentagon, but the slides conflicted with the model, so it was.
If they have a lead score, if they're going for lead goal and they have a lead scorecard, explaining how they're gonna meet all the lead things,
That's
that helps. Same with GBIP, if they're doing GBIP and they explain how they're gonna meet all that. But it's still that, those energy models for those of us who are wildlife people. That's what things know. Okay, so should we scroll through some of these?
Is this the latest version?
Looks like it.
Okay. I didn't know if you were making edits live.
No, I'm writing my own.
Oh, okay.
I'll update later though, and I'll look at the red line, because that would be really helpful.
Yeah, if it's not in that one, let me know and I'll find which.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
let's
I'll
just
Oh.
take a look, I'll let you know, that'd be awesome.
Just, did people have a chance? Maybe nobody's gonna answer that question, but sustainable, what are the goals of the process? What is sustainability? What do you need for passing grade? What are things we're really excited about? But then keep going. Definitions, key resources. Let's go and talk about these resources.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if this is comprehensive, but these were ones that I found that were useful. Like I also went through the Google Drive and reorganized checklists and letter archives because I found it confusing. So if anyone's confused why there are subfolders.
I'm very upset because I signed up to take the county class they offer on using Google Drive and they cancel. I got notified they canceled it for low enrollment.
I can just do the Google Drive. I can do that. I was curious though, where other people are keeping their letters because there weren't recent letters in the drive. Are these like on personal computers and?
Some of them are on the,
These
I mean,
ones
they all
are the
end-
board.
they all
I
end up-
sometimes, I'll put them in the letters to the board, but usually it's, I think people have been uploading them in here, or Joan eventually just uploads them in here.
That's what happens is we approve them and we approve the draft. and
Yeah.
Then Joan say, if you guys send them in, then you have the latest version, that's the signed version.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, I will add that link into there because I
That'd be
didn't find
good.
that.
So let's go back to.
Are we all on this drive? Cause I've like spent hours searching for this and I.
Yeah, same.
Me and
Yeah.
I got it.
I think.
So you're thinking nutrition orientation isn't comprehensive?
Because I based my letter that I wrote based off the most recent one I could find, which was 2023.
Oh,
So I can look at the 2025 one because I don't know how
Right,
much they've
it
changed.
changed
So
quite a bit.
that's helpful.
There's sort of competing drafts. There's the long version and the short version. Which, at another
Yeah.
point, they'll need to decide which one you like.
So maybe when you send out
That's
the
where I-
minutes.
Yeah, Janice
send
sent
us a
a,
link.
Janice sent a link to Liliana when you joined. She said, here's our Google Drive. I was like, I still have that email saved. Yeah, yeah, anyway. So is there more we want to say about?
My only call out would be to just scroll to the bottom. That's like the key part. This step by step is, you scroll up and that feels, sorry, go up to the section above. This is like key stages. It's helpful for me. The step by step below is probably not 100% correct because again, I haven't gone all the way through. But it also includes, and then Joan had helped with some of the documents to look over. And then I would just encourage everyone to flip to the bottom here and just add like your own tips and tricks. You don't have to add your name. This was just, I put names because I took this from emails. So that way, if people were confused where I came up with that. But if you had a tricky SPRC and you learned something really smart, it would be really great if we house that here. So we could use it.
I'll use the tangentially related topics to weigh in on sustainability. That's what Joan does, but you're right, there can be resistance.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
Well, as a fellow newbie, I definitely appreciate all this.
yeah,
Great ideas.
It's great.
Very, very helpful.
yes, and I think building it, and it's on the Google Drive, so we can all learn. Oh, that's it. Okay, Melissa, is there anything else you'd like to say about it?
No, that's it. If there's another process that only one person knows how to do it, I can do this for that too. That's the only call out.
Great. Well, round of applause. for
Yes.
Okay, so I think we have time to take a quick look at the work plan. So this is our work plan for 2025 that we approved in the fall. We skipped the priority objectives, and we're still against climate change. I wanted to go up a little bit there. So I want to point out that a sweeping county board climate change resolution has been passed. The climate, we're working on the climate, but the climate action policy, climate action plan is being worked on actively, and we've weighed in on some aspects. Green building incentive policy is what I thought we'd spend most of this year on, and we haven't because of the change.
Yet.
Yeah, not yet, but we will. And then if we scroll down, I've added this new thing that we were frustrated with the budget. Again, it was the too early, too late thing. By the time we're weighing in on the budget, we can't say this budget is a status quo budget, throw it all out and make it all about climate change. So putting, we said we would do a letter in the fall. And Doug doesn't necessarily have to write the letter, but he has to remind us to write the letter, but hopefully this will help. The work to be done on making sure we're getting all our federal grants, kind of probably not as high level as before.
I think now we're in the implementation phase, but we have what, 3 or 4 federal grants that are.
There's 3, yeah.
3.
We're still swimming for now, but.
Yeah, but the new opportunities may not be, coming.
No, there's a lot of litigation around the new opportunities right now.
But my point is that some of these things are getting done. Maybe, again, not sort of like Doug's point about, well, it changes the electric grid. But, we are weighing in on all these things and they are happening. The SPRC process, part of building, well, that's a fast, let's go up a little bit more. So this, scroll up, please, Jenna. Let's see what category this is. Still the same one. Okay, comprehensive climate change, SPRCs, they show up again. Review, assess, publicly proposed site plans with 10 active SPRCs, which are not. Keep going. Update the SPRC checklist. Expanded outreach to homeowners. We've talked about this tonight.
I actually have something I want to talk to C2E2 about in that category, and maybe I'll meet with Joe and Melissa, I guess individually, to talk about that idea. We talked about it a little bit, but Cindy's given me some time in June to talk about this, but it's in that category. But
let's see, we'll be working on that in our work.
It would be
plan.
more significant, yeah.
So we're a third of the way through the year. So and Joe and Melissa just kind of agreed to let me put their names there. In fairness, Trevor, Green Banks, we had a meeting on it. We're still in active discussions about all of that. So let's keep going. But that's definitely something we do. Transport decarbonized. We did write a budget letter. We are incredibly actively participating in the master transportation plan. And Lily's agreed to support Joan, especially since, as we know, Joan is transitioning off. So Lily will pick that up and is already going. The art bus is in there, done that. Let's keep going. Right. I don't know about CCAs. I don't know that we're going to do that this year. The energy committee is working on, let's scroll down a little bit more. Public education campaigns, as you heard, the chair of the energy committee will be joining us.
That's an idea.
Joining us in June to talk about that. County government, I think that we saw that there's been a lot of progress made on the county government. You see that in the greenhouse gas inventory. EVs keep going. I think they've done a lot. We know that 2 or 3 of the air team have been assigned over to facilities to work on county facilities and county EV. Solid Waste Committee has been, after not meeting for over a year, we're at least meeting. Not sure we're effective, but we're meeting. So yeah, here's the equity thing, which we're finding our way to what we were looking for here. But here were our ideas at the time we did the work plan. Reducing energy burden of low and middle income, low and moderate income residents, microgrids, equitable access to green spaces. We said we would work on a policy for Heat Island. Mark Greenwood, before he left, he was working on it. He's found it very difficult to find like an SPR criterion that we could say was the Heat Island thing. And then public education outreach, Jen already mentioned. That that she is actively working on that. Stormwater, heat island, watersheds. Now that we have Jason, who's got a lot of expertise in that, we can work on that. Microgrids, Elizabeth and Joe, you could talk about microgrids too. So I think my point is we keep scrolling, but I think we've made some progress and we can see where we need to focus some more. And if the GBIP comes up this year, that will still be it. But there's a lot of new names here that I guess the red is here. Thank you. Alex, Jamie, there's more red. We have some new committees. Thanks to everybody who stepped up for that note that I sent around. So I just wanted to remind us that we have this work plan, that we are making progress on it, but that there's room to do more public education and so on. So I attached it to my email for this meeting, so feel free to look at it. And if you have ideas, as Elizabeth does.
You'll find out.
Yeah. Yeah, darn, she's out of town in May, or else you find out in May, but you have to wait till June. Okay, so I know that Joan sent a note out around the master transportation plan with questions, and she said Cindy will lead the discussion. And I did read the documents and print them out, but I think we don't really have, I'd rather, the vision and goals, as Jason said earlier, have come along and they're much more inclusive of sustainability. And I think that we don't have time to figure out what the metrics should be, but we heard a lot about the importance of transportation in the greenhouse gas inventory. So no pressure, Liliana. It's all up to you.
I think it's 4 minutes to go, so yeah, we can revisit this later because I think Joanne has very strong ideas. It's like on behind, and I don't want to not back her up.
Yeah.
I think she is not as happy as she could be because her vision wasn't totally embraced, but I did see progress. So
yes, that's good.
Joan sets the bar high.
Yes. So then I think we should use our last few minutes to talk about what's new in the energy committee.
Sure. We had a really great couple of speakers. We had Jen come and talk about the work plan, the policy office work plan, which we had previously had at the commission level. We also had a speaker from Amazon come and talk about their climate commitments, their data center build out, and how they're going to be empowering
the world.
Yep.
That was the subtext.
Yeah. Well, I think it was really eye-opening because they're really quite committed to clean energy and sustainability, and I think that is sometimes gets lost in big corporate world. But I thought that the speaker, who's someone that I had worked with, did a really great job kind of highlighting what those.
I was hugely skeptical of it.
Yeah. And it's tough to tell like what's greenwashing and what is really happening, but I thought that was just a good talk. This next meeting we will have Ivy Main come and talk about what's going on at the state level with legislation. A lot of activity in the current legislative session around data center load growth. And I'll have some graphs and whatnot to show you about like how intense the load growth is here in Northern Virginia, because globally we are the epicenter of what's happening broadly across the country and across the globe. But Northern Virginia is absolutely explosive. I mean, I think data center load growth today is about 25% of the state's energy use. That's very different from even like 2-3 years ago. So it's changing the economics of energy delivery, and I think there are things that we can do to take advantage of that.
So we'll hear about more in June.
Let's chat about whether or not that makes more sense for May. I thought that May was not good for the agenda, but I'm in town.
Okay.
So we can figure that out.
All right, sounds good. Anybody else from the energy committee want to mention anything?
I don't have anything to do with the energy committee, but I was going to share that there is a lot of meetings happening in DC Climate Week this week. And there is tons of technical people talking about this issue of hyperscalers, data centers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's a really good place to learn because you get all this collection of opinions about what is possible and what is happening. So today I heard the people from the investment side, the VCs talking about the CEO of the chip factory at ABM, talking about that as well as the people who are concerned that these data centers are not necessarily going to be run on renewable energy 100%, and they are gonna cannibalize renewable energy for all populations. So it's just a thing.
Yeah, that's great. And I see a lot of people nodding. It's gonna be a big deal. Thank you for that. And thanks to everybody for all the contributions. Is there anything anybody else would like to say before we adjourn at 9:00?
Nice job. Simplify. Can we come and join and listen to the energy committee?
Yeah, of course.
The public meeting.
Yes, it is,
Oh.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
Someone come
I
on.
never get the agenda.
Got a show in town. What else do you have on Wednesday night?
Yeah, I don't get the agenda, but it is posted. So fine.
Yeah, and Richard, I'm sure would be happy to share with C2E2 in case anybody ever wants to pick up. So I'll probably do a preview of the something for C2E2.
Well, all right. That's good. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah. Yeah.